Welcome to another deep dive. We're tackling cloud-native security today, and we've got a great guide for this one. Josh Armitage's Cloud-Native Security Cookbook. It's packed with practical solutions for securing cloud systems.
You really picked a good one this time. It is really practical. You know what I mean? It's not just theory. It gives you actual steps and even code snippets you can use right away.
Yeah, it felt like opening a toolbox full of solutions.
That's a good way to put it.
So let's talk about the big picture first.
Yeah.
Cloud-native environments. They're a whole different ballgame compared to traditional IT, right?
Right.
How has security had to adapt to that shift?
It's more than adaptation. It's a total transformation. The book actually calls it a shift from security as a gatekeeper to security as an enabler. It's like in the past, security was always saying no, trying to lock everything down tight. But that just doesn't fly in the cloud-native world, does it? It's too fast-paced.
Right, security can't be a bottleneck, can it? Otherwise, you lose all the agility and innovation that you moved to the cloud for in the first place.
Exactly. Armitage actually says, the waste incurred by long feedback loops, long lead times, and slow pace of change is incompatible with a digital-first reality.
Makes sense. So how do we make that shift then? How does security become an enabler instead of a blocker?
Well, a few key things, actually. The book talks about this idea of psychological safety within security teams.
Okay.
It's about creating a culture where people can take risks, experiment, and even admit when they mess up without being afraid of getting blamed.
Oh, I see what you mean, because if everyone's walking on eggshells, no one's going to want to try anything new.
Exactly. And that just kills innovation, right?
For sure. But how do you actually create that kind of environment, especially in a field where, let's be honest, mistakes can have pretty serious consequences?
It starts at the top. Leaders got to set the tone, Encourage open communication, actually ask for feedback, and make it clear that it's okay to fail sometimes, as long as you learn from it.
Yeah, build that trust.
Yeah.
And not just within the security team, right? Across the whole organization.
Absolutely. It's got to be a company-wide culture. And another thing the book highlights is customer focus for security teams.
Customer focus. I'm curious about that. Who are the customers in this context?
Well, think about it. Security isn't just about rules and regulations. It's about supporting the business, right? And who are the customers of the security team? It could be developers who need quick access to resources, or operations teams who need to see what's going on in the system. Even the people using your applications, they rely on you to keep their data safe and private.
So you've got to understand their needs and find ways to meet those needs securely.
Exactly. It's not just about building a fortress around your cloud environment. It's about understanding the flow of traffic and enabling that traffic to move securely and efficiently.
Got it. So you're not just a gatekeeper, you're like a traffic controller, making sure everything flows smoothly and safely.
I like that. A traffic controller. Now, speaking of enabling things, the book also talks a lot about DevSecOps. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, for sure. Who hasn't these days? But I'll be honest, I'm always up for a deeper dive into what it actually means. In practice, I mean.
Well, one thing the book makes crystal clear, it says you cannot achieve DevSecOps by buying a new tool. Instead, it is a deep-rooted change that starts and ends with people. It's about changing how teams work together, bringing development, security, and operations closer. So it's not just about throwing security tools at the problem, is it?
It's a culture shift. A big one, by the sounds of it.
It is, but it's essential if you want to do security right in a cloud-native world.
Where do you even start with a shift that big, though? Especially for large organizations, it can seem pretty daunting.
Yeah, I hear you. Start small. Break down those silos between teams, get people talking and working together. Maybe security engineers could start attending development team meetings or invite developers to participate in security audits.
Just get them in the same room, right? Start building those relationships.
Exactly. It's about building a sense of shared responsibility for security. So once you've got that collaborative foundation going, what are some practical steps you can take to build a secure cloud environment from the ground up?
I'm all ears. What does the cookbook recommend?
Well, it really gets into the nuts and bolts of building that secure foundation, across different platforms like GCP, AWS, and Azure. And one key principle it emphasizes is separating production and non-production environments.
Right, so keeping your development and testing environments separate from your live systems, that seems pretty intuitive. But what are the security benefits of that separation?
It minimizes risk, basically, and it lets you control access more tightly. By keeping those environments separate, you limit the damage that could be caused by, say, an accident or even malicious activity.
Right, so if someone accidentally introduces a bug into the development environment, It's not going to take down your whole live system.
Exactly. You don't want a small mistake to turn into a major catastrophe.
Makes sense. So it's like having safety protocols in place to prevent those kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly like that. And that separation is especially important when it comes to managing access and permissions. You only want authorized people to have access to certain environments and resources, right?
Absolutely. You don't want just anyone wandering around in your production environment. Now, one thing that really stood out to me in the book was this concept of region locking.
Oh, yeah, that's an important one.
Can you explain what that is and why it's so important in the cloud native world?
Sure, region locking is basically about controlling where your cloud resources are physically located. You're confining them to specific geographic regions, which can be super important for compliance or data sovereignty reasons.
So if I'm dealing with sensitive data
Yeah.
that's subject to certain regulations, I might need to make sure it's stored and processed only in regions that comply with those regulations.
Exactly. Like, if you're handling data from EU citizens, you might be legally obligated to keep that data within EU data centers. That's GDPR for you. Region locking gives you that control.
So it's a powerful tool for both compliance and just maintaining control over your data in general. And I love how the book even gives you code examples for implementing region locking on different cloud platforms. Really practical stuff.
It does. And it points out some interesting things, too. Like, for example, some AWS resources just have to be in the US East 1 region, no matter what.
It's a good reminder that these cloud platforms, they offer a lot of flexibility, but
Yep.
they also have their own quirks and limitations.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You got to be aware of those. Now, another area where things can get tricky is user management, especially when you've got multiple teams, projects, maybe even different cloud platforms in the mix.
Yeah, keeping track of all that can be a nightmare.
It can. That's why centralized user management is so essential in a cloud-native environment. It's about having one central place to manage all your user accounts, roles, permissions, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so instead of having separate systems for each team or project, you have one hub where you can see and manage everything.
Exactly. It makes things way more efficient and way more secure, you know?
I can see that.
Mhm.
But how do you balance that centralization with the need for teams to have some autonomy? Like they still need to be able to manage their own resources to some extent, right?
Oh, of course. You don't want to micromanage everything. The book actually has a great example of this. It walks through onboarding a new team to GCP and how to give them what's called least privilege access.
Okay, so you're giving them the permissions they need to do their jobs, but nothing more, right? No more just giving everyone admin privileges and hoping for the best.
Definitely not. That's a recipe for disaster. It's about moving away from that all or nothing approach
Yeah.
and using a more granular role-based access model.
And thankfully, there are tools that can help with that, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Tools like Terraform can automate a lot of this, which
Yeah.
is essential when you're dealing with a large and constantly changing cloud environment.
Right, because manually managing all that would
Yeah,
be
nightmare.
For-
A complete nightmare. Now, we've covered secure foundations, region locking, centralized user management. What about visibility? Like, how do we actually see what's going on in our cloud environment so we can detect and respond to potential threats?
Yeah, it's one thing to build a secure system, but you also need to be able to keep an eye on it, right? Make sure everything's running smoothly.
Exactly. That's where the idea of a Security Operations Center, or SOC, comes in.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So a SOC is basically like a central command center for security, and the book actually guides you through building a cloud-native SOC. Using services like Security Command Center on GCP, Security Hub on AWS, and Azure Sentinel. These platforms give you a single place to monitor security events, analyze logs, and get real-time alerts about potential threats.
So it's like having a dedicated team, constantly watching your cloud environment for any signs of trouble.
Exactly. But the challenge with these systems is that they generate a ton of data. Like, how do you not get overwhelmed by all those alerts and notifications?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like drinking from a fire hose sometimes.
Yeah. It can be. That's why the book really emphasizes the importance of what it calls low noise, high signal alerts.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means that the alerts you get need to be meaningful. You don't want to be bombarded with irrelevant stuff. You need to be able to quickly focus on the alerts that really matter.
The ones that are actionable, right? So you can actually do something about them.
Exactly. So it's not just about having an SOC, it's about setting it up properly. So it gives you valuable insights rather than just adding to the noise.
It's like fine-tuning your radar,
Yeah.
right? So you're only picking up the signals that you really need to pay attention to.
Precisely. You got to prioritize based on how serious the potential threat is and how sensitive the data is that might be involved.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've got our secure foundation, we're managing user access effectively, and we've got our SOC up and running. What about data encryption? That seems like a no-brainer these days with all the data breaches happening.
It's absolutely essential. And the book dives deep into this. It explains the difference between encryption at rest and encryption in transit.
Okay, I think I have a basic understanding of that, but I'd love to hear it from an expert. What's the difference exactly?
Well, encryption at rest means your data is encrypted while it's just sitting there, on a hard drive, in a database, or in cloud storage. Encryption in transit protects your data while it's moving across networks.
So it's like having two layers of protection, right? Whether my data is just hanging out or traveling around, it's encrypted and therefore much harder to access.
Exactly. The book even gives you specific examples of how to implement encryption on different platforms. GCP, AWS, Azure, you name it. You can encrypt pretty much everything, from cloud storage buckets to entire databases.
That's reassuring. But what about those encryption keys? Managing those seems like a pretty critical piece of the puzzle, too.
It is. The book talks about that as well. It emphasizes the importance of using multiple keys and having a robust key management system. You don't want one key to unlock everything, right? If one key gets compromised, the damage should be limited.
Right, like having separate locks on different parts of your vault.
Yeah.
So even if someone gets one key, they can't get to everything.
Exactly. It's about minimizing the impact of a potential breach. Now, speaking of preventing data loss, what about DLP? Have you heard of that? Data loss prevention.
I have, yeah. But I'm not entirely clear on what it entails. What exactly is DLP all about?
DLP is all about identifying and protecting sensitive data. It can help prevent those accidental data leaks or even intentional ones.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of situation would DLP help with?
Well, imagine someone accidentally emails a spreadsheet with customer data to the wrong person, or a malicious insider tries to sneak confidential information out of the company. DLP can help prevent those kinds of scenarios.
So it's like having a security guard that's constantly watching for any signs of sensitive data leaving the building.
That's a great way to think about it. And the book explains how to use DLP on different platforms, like GCP and AWS. And it stresses that you should focus your scans on the high-risk areas, to keep costs down.
Makes sense. You wouldn't want to scan every single file if most of them don't contain sensitive data.
Exactly. Got to be strategic about it. Okay, we've covered secure foundations, user management, encryption. We've got our SOC and DLP in place. What about the network itself? All this data is flowing through the cloud. How do we make sure the network is secure?
You're right. We can't forget about the network. What does the Cookbook say about securing the network in a cloud-native environment?
It dives into cloud-native networking, which is a whole topic in itself. Each platform, whether it's GCP, AWS, or Azure, has its own tools and services for building a secure network architecture. Things like VPCs, subnets, firewalls, security groups, and of course, the principle of zero trust networking.
Zero trust networking. That sounds pretty serious.
It is. It's a big shift from how we used to think about security. It's about moving away from this idea that anything inside your network is automatically trustworthy.
So no more assuming that once you're past the firewall, you're good to go.
Exactly. With zero trust, you verify every user, every device, every connection before you grant access. You're basically assuming that a breach is always possible, and you're taking steps to minimize damage if it happens.
It's like having a security checkpoint at every door, even within your own building.
Exactly. Constantly validating and authenticating, making sure that only the right people have access to the right things. And the book has some great examples of how to put zero trust principles into practice, like creating a VPC with no default access. You start with a secure baseline and build from there.
I like that approach. It seems much more proactive and realistic, especially in the cloud, where the boundaries are always shifting.
Absolutely. Now, the book also talks about using infrastructure as code to automate security. Have you heard of that approach?
I have, but I'd love to hear more about it. What are the advantages of managing security as code?
Well, one of the biggest advantages is consistency. When you manage your infrastructure as code, using tools like Terraform, you're basically defining your security policies in code instead of configuring everything manually.
So if you need to deploy new servers or update existing ones, you can be sure that those security configurations will be applied consistently across your entire environment.
Exactly. It reduces the risk of human error, which is always a good thing when it comes to security. Plus, it makes it much easier to track changes and ensure that everything is properly documented.
Right, because trying to keep track of all those manual configurations would be a nightmare, especially as your cloud environment grows.
A total nightmare. And the book even talks about using modules in Terraform, which are basically pre-built code blocks that encapsulate security best practices. It's like having a library of pre-approved security configurations that you can just plug into your infrastructure.
That's really cool. It's like having a team of security experts on call, helping you build security into your infrastructure from the ground up.
Now, one thing that I'm always curious about is how to handle the challenge of sharing resources securely between different teams.
Ah, yes, that can be tricky,
Yeah.
especially if those teams are working on different projects or different parts of the application. Right, you want them to be able to collaborate, but you don't want to give them free reign over everything.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between collaboration and security. And the book explores how to use IAM conditions and resource tagging to enable controlled access while maintaining those security boundaries.
So you're basically setting up rules and permissions that allow teams to share what they need to share, but nothing more.
Precisely. It's about giving them the access they need to do their jobs effectively, but no more than that.
I like that. It's like giving them a well-equipped toolbox, but making sure that the most dangerous tools are kept under lock and key.
Exactly. And the book even provides examples of how to share a project on GCP or an account on AWS securely. It really walks you through the different options and the trade-offs involved.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've covered so much ground already, from building that secure foundation to empowering teams and managing risk effectively. But I'm eager to hear what the cookbook has to say about the future of cloud-native security. Before we dive into that, let's take a quick pause to let all this information sink in. We'll be right back to wrap things up and explore what lies ahead for cloud security.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. Ready to keep digging into cloud-native security. We've covered a lot of ground already, but where do we go from here? What else does this cookbook have in store for us?
Well, it doesn't just stop at the basics. It actually delves into some pretty advanced concepts and strategies. One that I found particularly interesting is the idea of providing internal security services.
Internal security services. What does that mean exactly? Are we talking about building our own security tools from scratch?
Not necessarily building tools, no, but more about setting up the right framework and controls to really manage security effectively. One key concept here is controlling your identity perimeter.
Identity perimeter. I'm not familiar with that term.
Think of it like this. As organizations embrace this whole cloud native thing, right? Teams often get more autonomy, more agility, and they need the ability to manage identity themselves. Create roles, manage permissions efficiently, without always having to go through a central security team for every little thing.
Ah, I see. So you're giving them more freedom, but within certain limits. Right.
That's the idea. The identity perimeter defines those boundaries and controls for identity management. It's about making sure things stay secure and preventing anyone from accidentally or intentionally, escalating privileges.
So it's like giving teams the freedom to manage their own identities, but within certain guardrails, right? To prevent them from accidentally messing things up for everyone.
Precisely. It's a balancing act for sure. The book offers some practical strategies for how to do it right. For example, on GCP, it recommends using conditions on specific IAM roles.
Okay, so you're not just giving them the keys to the kingdom.
Right. Let's say you have a team that needs to manage project permissions. You can give them the ability to delegate certain tasks, but restrict them from granting overly permissive roles that could, compromise security.
Ah, so even with the power to delegate, there are still limits in place to prevent any accidental security mishaps.
Exactly. You're giving them control, but with safeguards. The book also talks about using groups to stray limited IAM administration between users in a project.
Okay, so even more granular control over who can manage what.
Right. And when it comes to service accounts, which are often used for automation, the book emphasizes the need for tight control over their IAM policies too. Service accounts can be a real vulnerability if not managed carefully.
So we're not just throwing the doors wide open, are we? We're giving teams the tools and permissions they need, but within a carefully controlled framework.
Precisely. It's about finding that balance between enabling teams and maintaining a strong security posture. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about understanding the state of our cloud infrastructure.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, how do we know what machines are out there? What software is running on them? Are they properly configured? All that good stuff.
You mean like having an inventory of all our cloud assets and their security posture?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's crucial, but it can be a real challenge, especially in a dynamic cloud environment where things are constantly changing.
Yeah, it's not like a static data center where you can just walk around and take inventory.
Right. But the book talks about inventory management for virtual machines. On GCP, for example, it recommends using OS config.
OS config, what's that?
It's a service that gives you a comprehensive view of your instances. You can see installed packages, security configurations, all sorts of stuff. It's like having a detailed inventory list for every machine in your cloud environment.
So you can see at a glance if a machine is missing critical security patches or running outdated software.
Exactly. That level of visibility is so important for maintaining a secure cloud environment. But it's not just about visibility. You can actually take action based on what you find.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
The book discusses using OS policies to enforce the presence or absence of certain packages on your machines. For example, let's say you have a policy that requires all machines to have a specific antivirus software installed. You can use OS policies to automatically enforce that policy across your entire cloud environment.
Wow, so it's like having an automated security guard patrolling your cloud environment, making sure everything is in order.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of security guards, what about patching? It's one of those essential but often tedious tasks.
Yeah, patching. How do we make sure all our machines are up to date in a dynamic cloud environment?
It's crucial. And the book has a whole section on patching at scale across GCP, AWS, and Azure. For example, on GCP, it recommends using the OS Patch Management Service. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, so instead of manually patching every machine,
Yeah.
we can automate the process and ensure consistency.
Exactly. And it reduces the risk of human error, which is always a good thing in security. Plus, you can make sure patches are applied quickly, minimizing that window of vulnerability between when a patch is released and when it's actually installed.
Speed is definitely key in the cloud. New vulnerabilities are popping up all the time.
All the time. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about data backup.
Okay, data backup. We've talked about protecting data in transit and at rest. What about making sure we can recover our data if something bad happens, like a disaster, a cyber attack, or even just a plain old mistake?
Data backup is absolutely fundamental to any security strategy. And the book gets into the specifics of backing up data on different platforms, GCP, AWS, Azure, you name it. It emphasizes that each platform has its own unique approach to backup and recovery, so you need to understand the nuances of each one.
So there's no one-size-fits-all solution for data backup in the cloud.
Nope. Each platform has its own quirks and best practices. On GCP, for instance, backups are often managed on a service-by-service basis.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. You have managed backup services for things like BigQuery, Cloud SQL, and Spanner. These services handle the backups and restores for you automatically. But for services that don't have built-in backup options, you might need to get creative.
So you might have to roll your own solution.
Exactly. You can use tools like Cloud Scheduler and Cloud Functions to create custom backup solutions for those services. It's all about making sure your data is protected no matter what.
I'm really impressed with how this cloud-native security cookbook emphasizes enabling teams. It's not just about locking everything down. It's about finding ways to empower developers and operations teams to contribute to security.
Absolutely. It's a real shift in mindset. And the book gives specific examples of how to do it right, like securely sharing projects on GCP and accounts on AWS. It's all about striking that balance between giving teams the freedom they need to work effectively while still maintaining that strong security posture.
Right, because if security is just seen as a roadblock, people are going to try to find ways around it.
Exactly. But if they feel empowered to be a part of the security process, they're more likely to buy in and actually help keep things secure.
Makes sense. It's about creating a culture of shared responsibility for security.
Precisely. And that extends to security testing as well. The book actually covers application security scanning on all three platforms, GCP, AWS, and Azure. It talks about using tools specifically designed to find those common vulnerabilities in web applications.
Oh, I like that. So you're giving developers the tools they need to find and fix security issues early on.
Exactly. It's all about shifting security left. Instead of security being this separate thing that comes in at the end and points out all the flaws, you're integrating it into the development process from the very beginning.
Right. And if you can catch those vulnerabilities early, they're typically much easier and cheaper to fix.
Absolutely. It's a win-win for everyone. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the basic principles of cloud-native security to some really practical solutions on different platforms. But now I'm really excited to delve into the future of cloud security. What does the cookbook have to say about what lies ahead? Let's take a quick pause to gather our thoughts, and then we'll come back and explore the exciting possibilities and maybe some challenges that await us in the ever-evolving world of cloud-native security.
Welcome back to our deep dive into cloud-native security. We've covered so much ground already, from building a secure foundation to empowering teams and automating all those essential security tasks. But now I'm really curious about what's next. What does the future hold for this constantly evolving world of cloud security? What does the Cloud Native Security Cookbook have to say about the challenges and opportunities that are, just over the horizon?
Well, the book actually wraps up with a chapter called Security in the Future, and it's a fascinating read. Armitage acknowledges that predicting the future is, always a bit of a gamble. But he does point to some key trends and challenges that are likely to shape the landscape of cloud-native security in the coming years.
Okay, so what's on the horizon? What should we be preparing for?
One thing he really emphasizes is the importance of supply chain security.
Supply chain security. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
As organizations rely more and more on third-party software and services, right? Making sure that whole supply chain is secure becomes absolutely critical. Think about it. Even if your own systems are locked down tight, a vulnerability in a third-party component that you depend on could create a huge risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like building a fortress but leaving the back gate wide open.
Exactly. And this is only getting more complex as those software supply chains become increasingly global and interconnected. Armitage also predicts a continued shift towards zero trust models, which we talked about earlier. As cloud environments become more complex and distributed, that principle of never trust, always verify becomes even more crucial.
So zero trust is not just a buzzword. It's really a fundamental shift in how we think about security in the cloud. Any other major trends that caught your eye?
Well, the rise of AI and machine learning is definitely going to have a huge impact on security, both offensively and defensively. Imagine attackers using AI to automate their attacks, probing for weaknesses at a scale we've never seen before. And on the other side, imagine defenders using AI to analyze mountains of data, spotting threats that would be invisible to humans. It's going to be a constant arms race, with both sides leveraging the power of AI.
That's both exciting and a little bit scary, to be honest.
I know, right? It's like a whole new world of possibilities and threats. So how do we, as security professionals, get ready for this AI-powered future? Well, Armitage stresses that continuous learning is more important than ever.
So we can't just rest on our laurels. We've got to keep learning and evolving to stay ahead of the game.
Exactly. We need to understand these new technologies and how they can be used both for good and for bad. We need to develop the skills to implement and manage them effectively. And it's not just about technical skills either. Armitage also talks about the importance of building situational awareness.
Okay, what does that mean in the context of security?
It's about understanding the bigger picture. It's not just about knowing the tool and techniques. It's about understanding your organization's risk tolerance, the evolving threat landscape, the whole context of your security posture.
So it's like being a chess player. You need to know how to move the pieces, but you also need to be thinking several moves ahead, anticipating what your opponent might do.
That's a great analogy. And Armitage actually suggests using a tool called Wardley mapping to help visualize that security landscape and pinpoint where you need to focus your efforts. It's a way to map your security capabilities against your business goals and that ever-changing threat environment.
I'll have to check that out. Sounds like a really useful tool for strategic planning. So if we had to boil down the future of cloud-native security to a few key takeaways, what would they be? What are the things that our listeners should really take to heart?
I think adaptability, continuous learning, and a proactive mindset are essential for anyone working in cloud security these days. It's a fast-moving field, and you've got to be able to stay ahead of the curve. Armitage sums it up really well in the book, he says. Cloud-native security is both the same and different as security in other domains. Armed with the recipes in this book, you'll be able to quickly create and configure resources to provide a secure platform and guardrails for your engineering function. You'll also gain the visibility to understand your security posture and compliance at scale, and leverage automation and cloud-native tooling to maintain and iteratively improve your posture over time.
I love that. It's like he's saying, yes, cloud native security is tough, but you've got this. You have the tools and the knowledge to succeed.
Exactly. He leaves us with this sense of, optimism and a call to action to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in cloud native security.
That's a great note to end on. Well, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into cloud native security. We've explored the foundational principles, delved into practical solutions on various platforms, and even taken a peek into the future.
It's been a great discussion. I hope it's been helpful for everyone listening.
Me too. Remember, folks, security is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing journey. And with the right tools, the right knowledge, and the right mindset, you can navigate that journey confidently and successfully.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and stay secure in the cloud. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.